welcome to the Teaching Together podcast, where we celebrate and share the glows and grows of teacher life. I'm Grace.
And I'm Sierra.
Well, this is a bit of a different episode. If you are new to our podcast feed, welcome. We call these the Recess Digest episodes. They're a bit shorter. We aim to squeeze them into a recess. Hopefully you've got a nice warm beverage or a sweet treat or something to keep you company while you listen. And this is only our fourth Recess Digest ever. And we've been working through some of the habits of mind. So we're going to continue doing that today. And we're going to be looking at two new ones. We're going to be applying past knowledge to new situations and taking responsible risks. And since this is Recess Digest and our tea is rapidly cooling, why don't we just jump in to our conversation? And we can start with applying past knowledge to new situations. And thankfully, it's pretty self-explanatory. You're using what you already know in a new context. And the official teacher document provided by the Habits of Mind Institute website says it opens up their discussion with this rhetorical question. Have you ever worked to make sense of something new by making an analogy or a connection to something in your past? And I have. For example, on the weekend when I had to go to a car show thing that I was not interested in, but someone that I care for very deeply does care for cars very deeply. And they were like, hey, this thing, you can put this thing on the engine and it keeps all the heat in, and it's like fabric, and you put it over some part of the engine and it keeps it warm. And I was like, it's like a tea cozy. And he was like, if it has to be like a tea cozy, yes, it can be like a tea cozy. I was applying my past knowledge of tea cozies to this unknown universe of cars. And honestly, that is how I make sense of most things. If I can relate anything to a book that I've read, or like literally the concept of a tea cozy actually really helped me understand this random thing in the engine. I don't actually know what it's called. Don't even remember what part of the engine it goes on, but I remember that it acts like a tea cozy. That is so helpful. And I feel very intelligent when I am able to use an analogy. It's usually when I am talking about car things, and I can prove that I understand it by making an appropriate analogy.
It actually makes a lot of sense also because of the way that our brains work and store information in like schema or schemata.
Yes.
We've spoken about those before, and how like you're far more likely to remember or recall something if you can like attach it or categorize it to a different piece of information that you already have in your long-term memory. So, you know, you are very capable of knowing what a tea cozy is and what it looks like and what it's for and what its purpose is, because that's already stashed away in your memory. So it's a lot more convenient for you to learn about this new piece of information about whatever the thing is that goes on the motor of the car. And so analogies or, trying to link things to prior knowledge is hugely important. It's a key aspect of explicit instruction, for one thing, but it also makes a lot of sense about why they've included it here as a habit of mind, which, if you haven't listened to our very first Habits of Mind episode, habits of mind are essentially habits of like effective learners. And so this is a good habit to establish.
Yeah, they're designed to be universal and not even just learning, but just being an adult in the world. Looking at them as a whole, there's like 16 of them. I can never remember how many there are. There's quite a few. And as you read through them, I find myself going, oh yeah, I'd love to just have that in my personality toolbox. I'd love to be a flexible thinker. I'd love to be able to collaborate with people. I would love to be able to instantly make connections with things I already know. And we do that so much in kindergarten. We always start with, well, what do you already know about whatever? Like we're doing 2D shapes and 3D objects in maths at the moment. And the very first thing I asked my kids was, what 2D shapes do you know? What 3D objects do you know? And often we will start with the classic thinking routine, see, think, wonder, because kindergarten kids can do that quite easily. You literally just look with your eyeballs and go, what do you see? And that's activating past knowledge because they can go, oh, I've seen this before. I know what that is. I can name that. And we start from there and then we ask questions, which is just, helpful for everyone, but especially little people who don't actually have a lot to draw on. It helps to ground knowledge in something tangible rather than something abstract that they can't really get their heads around. And just thinking about how in inquiry learning, we always talk about how everything is more meaningful because it's connected. But just in general, things are more meaningful if you can make a connection with something that's relevant to you and go, oh, this character from this TV show reminds me of this person that I really like in my life. So I really like this character or whatever. Things just have more meaning if you can make them relevant to you. So if you're just trying to make things interesting for your students, you know, okay, what's something I know that they like? What are the young people into these days? I don't know what they're into. I'm old. I teach 6-year-olds. They're not really into anything cool. But anyway, but what's something I know that they like that I can connect this to? That's kind of what you're doing when you're applying past knowledge.
And that links back to know students and how they learn.
Oh my gosh,
which
yes,
is
it does.
Our number one standard.
Yes.
For professional teachers, which we are.
Yes, we are. We are professional teachers, and so are you, dear listener. Well done. Yes, I quite like this one. On the Habits of Mind Institute website, there's a section for students. There's a great sentence near the end that says, learning is not just an accumulation of isolated facts or skills. It is finding the connections or patterns that paint a bigger picture that is more easily stored in your memory for future use, which is what you were saying, Sarah, about the schema or schemata or whatever. We learn from reflecting on and making sense of our past experiences is what it also says on the website. So it can just be really helpful. And so some of the questions that the website uses to prompt students when using this habit of mind are, what does this situation or problem remind me of? What do I already know about this? How is this just like the time when I blah, blah, blah? What parts of the situation or problem do I need more clarity on? So is there just a big gap in my prior knowledge? That's okay too. We don't have to have prior knowledge about everything. That's the whole point of being a learner. And these are all things that maybe if you're working with older students, you might want to actually give them those questions and go, before you come to me, just have a think. We call it split screening, and I actually don't know if I've referenced that on this podcast before. Split screening is where you explicitly teach a habit of mind while also teaching curriculum relevant content.
You know, that's like you were just reading my mind, because I was literally about to ask you, because I know that your school are really big on habits of mind. I was literally about to say, like, a lot of this seems like the type of thing that we as teachers could probably sort of do without making a really specific point of doing it. Like, you know, as just part of your lesson opener, you might be trying to link back to prior knowledge. So my question to you was going to be, do you actually take the time to teach these as explicit standalone habits that we hope over time kind of just develop into more natural things? Or do you think that we have to sort of help students to identify when and how they can use these habits?
It's a little bit of both. In kindergarten, we've been working on the same two all year, let's be real. And one of them is managing our impulsivity. But I think the other one that my class chose is striving for accuracy. And I find it's helpful in kindergarten for them to understand the importance of the habits of mind by focusing on one or two and then talking about them in every context. So how could we strive for accuracy in maths today? How could we strive for accuracy in literacy? How could we strive for accuracy in sport? That kind of thing. And with our inquiry learning, when we're planning our units, there's a spot that my school has on our little unit planner for the 2 focused habits of mind for this unit. And so that might be where a teacher would choose to draw on them. But we've done some professional learning on split screening, and you can pick whatever habit of mind you want. You could say, you know, on a whim, you know, this term, my students they really need to start listening with empathy and understanding. So we're going to split screen a lesson. I'm going to write one for the end of the week. We're going to split screen a lesson where we're still going to address content, but we're also going to be explicitly focusing on addressing that content through the lens of this habit of mind.
And I guess the benefit of split screening, as you describe it, means that teachers don't feel like they have to add this whole extra curriculum to something, to what they're doing. It actually just fits in with and marries up with what they're just doing in their classes naturally.
Yeah.
I feel like I use analogies all the time to explain things. And often, like, you know, you just find a good analogy for something and you just use it over and over and over again. And for the life of me, could not bring to mind any of my regular high use analogies to my mind when we were thinking about this episode. But one that just popped into my head right now is recently I've been teaching my year 8 students how to use Onshape, which is a CAD software. And we've been designing these really cool little lights using 3D printing. Anyway, it's really bizarre to students to use the language of like open the sketch and close the sketch. It's a really bizarre kind of thing that they don't really know. You know, that yes, they're drawing on a screen and they're kind of making shapes, but there's a lot of new language around like sort of 3D modeling that kind of uses all these words that they sort of know, like sketch. You know, they know that that means draw, but it's so specific and unique to this particular skill. Anyway, when we were first doing it, I drew a square on a piece of paper with a Sharpie in front of my class. And then I said, and now you're going to press the green tick on your screen to finish your sketch. And that's like putting the lid on the Sharpie. Now,
that's so cute.
Now nothing that we really do with the Sharpie is changing like the shape that we've drawn. Like I can still kind of run the Sharpie over my page, but it's not editing the sketch. The sketch is closed. It's finished. You're not drawing anymore. And you move on to something else.
That's really helpful, actually. For someone who doesn't really know what even CAD is, that's really helpful.
Yeah. And then if you want to reopen the sketch or you want to edit something about it, you've got to take the lid back off the Sharpie. You know, you've got to right click with your mouse. Anyway, but that was one that I used recently that I think really helped to maybe put a bit of a tangible understanding. Linking back to past knowledge and what they have and applying it to this really new situation for a lot of them. And sometimes as a teacher, I think we have to do that a lot on the fly sometimes.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I do. Maybe I should think about my analogies a little bit better ahead of time.
Sometimes I do that too. I go, when a student goes, I do not understand what you just said. And you have to go, okay, how can I explain this a different way? And you have to think of an analogy. Go, what's going to make sense to the student? Our brains are on fire right then.
They are. And they do come down to knowing the kids and what they are interested in and passionate about. Definitely. I've actually just thought of another one recently where I had a student who was like so befuddled at what we were doing. But I also knew that he was a fantastic piano player. And so thankfully, I was able to come up with some sort of mildly useful analogy, linking it back to musical notation that seemed to click for him about what we were trying to do. I actually can't even remember what the analogy was, but I know it was musical. And then it all made sense. So it does really help for us to know our students and what they're interested in to help make connections to past knowledge for them, for sure.
Amen. And in a similar vein to applying past knowledge, or perhaps applying past knowledge is useful for our next habit of mind. You know, we try and make a link. You know, we're intelligent, kind of. Talking about taking responsible risks, which honestly, I've talked about a million gajillion times when I've talked about learning to crochet as an adult and that kind of thing. This is probably the habit of mind that I have grown the most in professionally in the 18 months that I've been teaching. But I like the wording on the Habits of Mind Institute website, so I'm just going to read it. There's just 3 rhetorical questions. Have you ever had an idea but didn't follow through because you were more worried about being wrong or feeling foolish? Constantly, I'm really called out. Does this PDF know who I am? Because yes, 100%. Do you sometimes hold back in situations because you are afraid of losing? Losing my dignity? Yes. Have you ever taken a risk and it was a total disaster? No, because I'm risk averse. But you get the idea. And the key here is responsible risks. We're not being risky. We're having a go at something, not quite knowing how it's going to pan out, but risks are drawn on past knowledge, they're thoughtful about consequences, and have a well-trained sense of what is appropriate. That's really important. If you were going to teach this to students, you're not going to go, oh, I'm going to throw this brick at a glass window to see what happens. That's not the kind of risk we're taking. We're not doing that. We're not being impulsive. We're thinking, okay, I'm in a safe environment. I know my teacher and my peers. I know myself. I know what the rules and expectations are in this scenario, but the learning that I'm doing is a bit unfamiliar. And really, the risk usually is that I'm going to be wrong. And then I'm going to be embarrassed and everyone's going to laugh at me because I'm wrong. But what I love about this habit of mind is that it encourages students to do things that aren't immediately comfy, but will eventually be beneficial for them. And actually, I'm reminded of some professional learning we did as a staff last week, where our 2-stage 2 teachers, they love dressing up and like putting on silly voices and doing role play with their students. And they were talking about how it can really empower students who are afraid of being wrong because they're just playing a character. I wasn't wrong. I didn't mess up. That was my character. Like, that's different. I'm embodying a whole other person. I'm not thinking like Grace. I'm thinking like Stephanie or whoever the Swedish chef, I don't know, whoever, whichever character I need for this role play. And I just found that really interesting as a way to enable and empower students to take responsible risks.
Yeah. I love the language it uses in the handout. It says people who take responsible risks are willing to accept confusion, uncertainty, and higher risk of failure as part of the normal process and learn to view setbacks as interesting, challenging, and growth producing. I just love this, especially as a design teacher. And I had I think 57 parent-teacher interviews last week. 50 something. I'm pretty sure my final count was 57. And I can't tell you how many times I had this conversation with parents and students about how good design is actually about trial and error. And the main word in that is error.
Yes.
You actually can't improve or iterate or redevelop or refine any ideas if you don't first try something and then identify what the errors are with it. And so, yeah, I have to battle really hard to get my students comfy with this whole trial and error thing. And we've spoken a lot about error and error climates before.
Yes.
I think
we did a whole episode.
Earlier this year. And yeah, so helpful for me to try and bring that language into my classroom more. But yeah, I love this idea of responsible risks, and I just refuse to try and step in and save my students from those kinds of things.
Yes.
Things where I obviously don't want them to fail. I obviously don't want them to feel defeated. But I do know how rich the learning process can be when we allow them to be comfy with that uncertainty, or to be comfy with some of that confusion, and see them sort of stretch and grow through those as part of the normal process. If we just remove all of those difficult, challenging error moments, if we remove all of that from the learning because we want our students to, experience success, I think we are doing them a disservice. And yes, there's such a fine line between, making things accessible and building in enough success into what we're doing in our classroom to increase motivation. It's such a balance to get that right with this. We have to build in opportunities for our students to take risks, and we can't take all the risks for them because they are just going to really struggle when they then do face a challenging or a frustrating or an uncertain situation and they haven't experienced that regularly as part of learning. And then they experience it and they're like, oh my goodness, I must be so dumb, or I must be doing this wrong, or I mustn't be able to, or I'm just not a maths person, or I'm just not a this person, because they're not familiar with this like uncomfortable trial and error phase. And anyway, it's something that is like really on my heart at the moment as a teacher.
Mm-hmm. I also would hate to come across as an insincere, inauthentic teacher where I'm preaching about, you got to take risks, got to be okay with making mistakes, and having the kids go, yeah, but you're the teacher, you know everything and you never make any mistakes. So who are you to tell me to be brave? Like you're the one who gets to teach this lesson exactly the way you want it. You're never taking responsible risks. You're never doing anything scary. Don't want to be that teacher.
Yeah. So I think it's really good for us to acknowledge when we do make errors in our classroom in front of our class.
Appropriately.
Yeah, appropriately, obviously. And when they do call you out on mistakes, which they inevitably will, like my on the fly maths is pretty trad. And
Same.
That's my favorite word at the moment. So I had to throw that in there. But I will make errors or poor judgments with my maths quite frequently in class as I'm maybe talking through things. And if a student calls me out on it, or sometimes I'll ask them to double check for me. And if I'm wrong, it's like, okay, showing them how I handle that error is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important for us as teachers, maybe unless you're a maths teacher, to not like get too defensive of our errors that we make, or to sort of hide them under the rug too much. Where appropriate, I think it's so valuable for us to take those opportunities to talk through the errors that we make and how we respond when that happens.
I completely agree. And if it's happening in the moment organically, you're just a great model for your students. And before we wrap up, because recess is rapidly coming to a close, I just wanted to mention two things that are on the Habits of Mind Institute website. And this is on the for students section of the Taking Responsible Risks habit. It just emphasizes here that a responsible risk is not where you go in knowing absolutely nothing about what's going to happen. There are 2 dot points. One of them says, do a cost-benefit analysis. Like, put some thought into it. Consider, how serious would failure be? Which is a very interesting question. How satisfying would success be? And it talks about what are some of the best or worst possible outcomes. I don't know if you really want to do that all the time if you've got some particularly anxious people who will always think about the worst. But I thought that was really helpful. And in relation to that, preview new experiences. It literally says do a bit of research about what opportunities exist and what challenges you might face with something you are considering, which you and I do all the time because we're just thoughtful people who like to be probably over-prepared at times. But that's taking a responsible risk. We are not, fortune tellers. We can't see the future. We can't prophesy about the outcome, but we can do our preparation and go, okay, here's what I know, here's what I don't. And a responsible risk is one where we're not certain of the outcome. However, we are prepared. And again, we're not being impulsive. We're not being stupid. We're not being reckless. We're not being risky. But we're just having a go at something and seeing how it turns out.
Even just bringing that language into how you might respond when a student, mentions that they're struggling or that they're not sure what to do next. Like, a lot of the time I will try and say, well, what do you think you should do? And, try and put the thinking back on the student rather than doing the thinking for them. And if you bring that sort of language in, or what do you know? What do you not know? There might be small little incidental problems that need to be solved or risks that need to be taken within 10 minutes of your lesson. But when we do it with those smaller things and we start training them with those lower stakes risks, then I think that kind of thought process becomes more natural and more habitual as they get older and they're confronted with more serious risks. And in high school especially, we say this all the time from a student wellbeing perspective. We know that teenagers and adolescents are more likely to engage in risky behaviors.
Yeah.
And we actually want to see that starting with low stakes risks in the classroom. We don't really want their experimentation with risk taking to be happening in perhaps more dangerous and less controlled and less safe spaces. We want them to engage in those risk-taking behaviors in creative and safe ways, and that starts in your classroom.
Amen. And it is a Recess Digest, and we were possibly a little ambitious trying to put these two wonderful habits into a 30-minute episode, but those are the constraints we've placed upon ourselves. And so we come to the end of this episode and we say thank you very much for listening, and we hope this was really helpful. Maybe have a think about what's a responsible risk that maybe you haven't done in your classroom because you're unsure what could happen. Why not just give it a go? Why not even say to your students, hey, we're all going to practice taking a responsible risk together, and here's how I, as your teacher, am going to do that. And what's a really cheesy analogy that you could pull out of your back pocket if you need to with your students and go, this thing that you're struggling with is exactly like this other random thing.
You know what I reckon? I reckon ChatGPT could give you some fantastically cheesy analogies for certain things. Maybe as you're planning your next lesson, ask ChatGPT for a few analogies that could go with your syllabus point or lesson idea.
Yes.
Just to have on hand. You could just whip them out as needed.
Just to make yourself laugh even.
Yes, which links back to humor, which is another habit of mine that we will talk about another day.
And please find us on all of the socials. We are at Teaching Together, the podcast. If you have a cheesy analogy that you want to share, please, we would love to hear it and laugh along with you. But for now, we will say bye.
Bye.